Hey guys, welcome to my roles, builds, rotations, and role-based decision-making video. This is the second installment of my attempted PvP tutorial videos. I hope you guys enjoyed the first short one, but this one is probably long. It's going to have a lot of detail, so sit tight and focus up. This video will be focusing on how to create synergy through the use of amulets, runes, and traits. And from this, you'll be able to determine your role by the end of the video. In turn, you'll know what your rotation focus should be. That is, if I've got this right. I'm also going to show you a method of figuring out what your composition should be. The question would be, do you have the right people in your team? Can you change? And that brings me into the first section. Section 1, knowing when to change your build or class. Composition is an important thing, and you should attempt to discover what your teammates might be running if you're unsure to get the best output possible. Certain weapons could immediately enable you to determine what specialization or focus a player is aiming for, but this doesn't mean that you should always change. Solo queue is just one of those things that you have to get used to. Perhaps it's just a case that you can't change. You can't fulfill what you're missing, and nobody else on your team can either. Ultimately, this will lead to your composition failing and you might not have enough damage or sustainability or whatever else. This is a cut from an AT that I spectated a few days ago. They had 4 bunker druids and 1 soul beast and they had no damage. Happens, you know. If you feel that your team requires a build, then play that build to fill the void. Sometimes you may recognize familiar names, sometimes they will have been in your games and you may remember what they play. Perhaps play a build that counters them, or a secondary class that you feel would fit better into this scenario. As you can see here, I've changed from Engineer to Thief, and then changed my specialization, weapon set, and sigils. I didn't necessarily think that Thief was better into this matchup, but I did want to showcase that it is possible to do all of this in the time that you have allocated at the beginning of the game. That said, I do have an SSD, and that allows me to load quicker. If you do have a slow computer, consider setting up some characters with some preset builds. Always try to think about your build into your opponent, and try to be as flexible as possible. Maybe you don't know what to play, or how to play it, and that leads me into my next section, building into a role. Section 2A, runes, amulets, and class specializations. Now, I'm not going to break down every single amulet, nor am I going to break down every single rune. I'm going to show examples of generic amulet and rune combinations that will work on most builds. Some of this might be pretty straightforward, so bear with me. The complex stuff comes in section 2B. First off, decide what damage you're going to do. Do you want to be condition or power? Let's begin with a condition spec. This is the Carrion amulet. You're looking at a majority 1200 condition damage, 900 vitality, aka health, and 900 power for flat attacking direct damage. To complement this, you may run Rune of Scavenging. This has 175 condition damage, lifesteal passives, and 7% of your vitality gets turned into condition damage. If your condition output is focused on something else, like burning, maybe you would run with Rune of Balthazar. Now I'm making you think. Let's move on to a power spec. If you want very high burst damage with low HP, consider the Berserker amulet. This gives you 1200 power, 900 precision, 900 ferocity, but it doesn't offer you any vitality. This is why you have low health. It's an exceptionally punishing amulet. So if you're a beginner, I'd probably say go with Marauder. Marauder amulet is a more sustainable option, offering you 1050 precision, 1050 power, 560 vitality, and 560 ferocity. It's very commonly used amongst power output classes, and it's pretty much always a go-to unless your build requires the glass cannon of a Berserker, or the tanky output of a Demolishers. To complement this, consider using the likes of the Rune of the Scholar. This gives 175 power, 100 ferocity, and it gives you a 10% damage buff when your health is above 90%. Consider using this in a +1 role. You'll know what this means later. For a more boon-based spec, perhaps consider using Rune of Leadership. This consists of 36 to all stats, 30% increased boon duration, and a condition clear on elite usage. I'm going to be talking about this rune later on. And as another alternative, perhaps try using Rune of Strength. This grants you 175 power, 45% increased might duration, a chance of a might proc, and 5% increased damage whilst using might. This is good into a sustained fight. And finally, if you're looking to play a self-healing bunker such as a druid, consider using Mender's Amulet. This consists of 1050 power, 560 precision, 560 vitality, and 1050 healing power. This amulet allows you to do consistent damage via your pet and auto-attacking abilities, whilst also supplying you with a solid amount of healing power to sustain yourself. Alongside this, consider taking Rune of the Dolyak. This grants you 175 toughness, 100 vitality, and HP regen per second. The regen helps Celestial Avatar, and the toughness helps you into warriors, thieves, and revenants, for example. Basically, anything with high damage that you want to counter. Alternatively, you could take Rune of Water. Rune of Water has 175 healing power, 20% increased boon duration, passive condition removal, and your heal skills heal in an area of effect for your teammates. Now let's move on to the more complex stuff. Section 2b, Trait Synergy determining your role. And you can see my cursor for the remainder of the video because I'm an idiot. The last section was not to make you go and run those specific combinations, but more so to encourage you to make logical thought processes. Your build has to synergize to be most effective before even being able to consider what your role is in PvP. I'm going to show you my favourite current build to play, and then I'm going to tell you what role this places me into. I'm going to show you my amulet choice and rune choice, followed by my selection of trait lines and how they benefit my output. I'll be explaining synergy wherever possible, and explaining how this further defines my role. I'll also briefly cover my weapon choice, and the 2 sigils that I have on it. I hope you're ready for this. Let's begin. Static Discharge Protection Hollow Bruiser. My amulet is a Demolisher amulet. 1050 power, 1050 precision, 560 toughness, and 560 ferocity. This amulet does not offer any additional health, but I'm still relatively tanky. The toughness in this amulet, however, means that I can still sustain damage when combined with my trait selections. My rune of choice is the Rune of Leadership. As I've already stated, this grants 36 to all stats, 30% increased boon duration, 2 condition clears on elite usage, and it has boon synergy in my trait lines. With this build, boons mean that I take less damage. This is using a trait called Iron Blooded, which you're about to see. Let's look into my traits. I'll be going through every single trait in each line, and I'll be referring back to where I think there's synergy. This is something that you should actively do when building your character. Let's begin with tools. The tools trait line specifically interacts with the F1 to F5 abilities, beginning with optimized activation. This quite simply grants me vigor whenever I use an F1 to F5 ability. Static Discharge, also doing damage whenever I press one of those F1 to F5 abilities. Now we have Mechanized Deployment. This reduces the recharge of these abilities by 15%. Now this is our first non-F1 to F5 trait. This is a guaranteed flat damage output when you engage on your target, if they're above 50% health that is. Alternatively, you can take Lock On and abuse stealth classes. You should note that this also grants Vigor, and this is where we begin to see synergy. Now this next one is an important one to note. Excessive Energy grants 10% damage increase from Vigor boon uptime. This synergizes with optimized activation, and also with lock-on. Finally, we have Kinetic Battery. After 5 presses of F1 to F5, you gain predictable quickness and super speed. This is great for dueling, or disengage. Alchemy. Try to spot the synergy with the tools line. Hidden Flask grants Fury, Might, Retaliation and Swiftness when you're hit below 75% health. This is a lot of boons and synergizes with our rune. It's also great for dueling. Next, we have Invigorating Speed. When you gain Swiftness, you gain Vigor, and this ties back into Excessive Energy, aka granting us a 10% damage buff. I was going to make some memey synergy alert, but I think you get the point. Next up, we have Transmute. Transmute passively clears 2 conditions every 60 seconds when you have 2 conditions on you. This is great for dueling. Next up, Self-Regulating Defenses. This grants 3 seconds of immunity when hitting 25% health. Now you're about to see some more synergy. Here we have Compounding Chemicals. Heal yourself whenever you grant yourself a boon. So whenever we grant ourselves Vigor from our F1 to F4 traits, or whenever we get Swiftness, or whenever we hit 75% health, or whenever we use our utilities, we gain HP. We heal. Not to mention that we can also grant ourselves stability off of Corona Burst, our Photon Forge 3. And this synergy, it gets better. I'd like to introduce you to Iron-Blooded. Iron-Blooded reduces the amount of damage you take by 2% for every boon that you have on you. Now, do you remember all those boon sources we had? And do you remember the boon uptime that I have on my rune? I think you get the point, but I'm going to keep going. Finally, the Hollowsmith trait line. This line is more focused on dueling and sustainability. First off, we have Overheat. This is a punishing mechanic for hollows that hit 100% heat. Next, we have Prismatic Converter. This converts boons when coming out of Photon Forge, the F5 ability. This is to enable dueling. Next up, we have Heat Therapy. Heat Therapy heals us for each point of heat that we've lost, and that's a natural mechanic when it comes to Hollowsmith. This next trait actually synergizes and helps us duel. The barrier is great for dueling, as well as the stability, but granting ourselves stability also heals us and gives us damage reduction. This is picked up from Iron-Blooded. Another dueling trait, Laser's Edge. Above 50% heat, we do 15% more damage. When stacked with the damage gain from Vigor and other boons, we get quite scary with this. And finally, we have Vent Exhaust. We do damage when we dodge roll, and we also remove heat from our heat bar. This is passive damage gain. Let's quickly cover my utility skills. I'm sure you're sick of hearing the word synergy, but look out for it. First up, we have Healing Turret. This grants us regeneration, explosive damage in an area of effect, and also a water field. We combine that water field with Photon Forge 5, Photon Forge 2, and Rifle 5. This allows us to get additional healing from something that normally would only heal you once. Now for Photon Wall. Photon Wall is amazing for dueling. It blocks missiles and attacks for 3 seconds, and over 50% heat it will reflect. It can also be reactivated for damage. Now for my favourite utility skill, Hard Light Arena. This utility grants fury, protection, and regeneration for all allies. This utility will synergize with Iron-Blooded, compounding chemicals, and increase your dueling ability. When used at the right time, this utility can save your ass. I mean, healing and damage reduction? Come on. Now for the last of the defensive utilities, Spectrum Shield. This is a 50% damage reduction utility, and if you proc it when you're high on heat, you knock 50% off the cooldown. On top of that, it's also a stun break. It stacks with protection from Hard Light Arena, and with Iron-Blooded from all of the other boons that you're currently holding. This is where we see synergy. And this is why we are so powerful, and this is why we're a bruiser. And now for my last ability, Prime Light Beam. This is my elite, it's unblockable, and it provides extra damage when used over 50% heat threshold. The casting time of this ability benefits from Kinetic Battery. I'll remind you that this ability basically gives you 7 seconds of quickness after you've used F1 to F5 5 times. This ability can be an absolute game changer. It's very, very high damage. Not to forget that it's also AoE. Now let's quickly cover the F1 to F5 abilities. Regenerating Mist grants a water field. Again, we can abuse Leap and Blast finishes to get extra heals here. And of course, Kinetic Battery and Static Discharge. Particle Accelerator cripples your opponent and does flat damage. It also bounces between enemies. Prismatic Singularity is a big AoE crowd control ability. And then finally, we have Flash Spark. This is a blind and 10% reduced damage from conditions. That just about covers everything that's in my skill set. Now I just want to quickly cover why my weapon is so important. Rifle gives me the option to hit somebody from a distance when otherwise I couldn't. Photon Forge forces me into melee range, and it's nice to have another option. I have crowd control abilities on my rifle, as well as 1200 range. It's a fantastic alternative. I'm using Sigil of Energy. This grants me 25% endurance recharge when coming out of Photon, as well as when you're coming out of your Lesser Elixir passive proc at 25% health. It can save your life. Alongside this, I'm running Intelligence, 100% crit chance on 3 attacks. It's pure offense. Now before we move on, I just want to make sure that I summarize all of the synergy that we've witnessed. The whole point of showing you my traits was just to reiterate how you need to make everything work together. It's not just random button pressing, it's not just, "Ooh, that looks shiny," you need to make it work. And I hope that that really came across in that last section. I'm not going to read through and break this down, I'm just going to leave it on screen for you to read through if you want to pause the video. Section 3. Now let's get into the interesting bit, alright? I'm sure everybody wants to know what stupid roles I've come up with. I really hope I'm not a laughingstock after this. Oh my god. I was going to cover some general rotational advice, but I realised I'd already done it. It's actually all listed in my short PvP video that I made recently. I'm going to put the link in the description. Try not to focus too much on what the names in this next section represent, but more about what their intentions are. So let's get right into it, shall we? Let's go. The first role, the roamer / +1. The example here shows a thief. The thief is a mobile class with utility skills in the form of shadow steps, stealth, and signets to enable quick burst damage as well as mobility. A thief should always be looking at the minimap to determine what node needs a +1 or to be neutralized because it's available for decap. A thief should try and recall what player was on what point at what time. If that player shows up in the teamfight, chances are the node is available. Similarly, a mesmer can operate in the same way if you do not have a thief. Let's see the mesmer perspective. You're going to witness the mesmer do exactly the same thing that the thief did. The mesmer will abuse their mobility skills. In this perspective, you see the mesmer using ambush, jawn, and blink to get as close as he can to the point. He's also used portal on the midpoint, so he's ready to get straight back into it as soon as he can. This is an incredibly efficient method of neutralizing a point, or even capping one. Not to mention, it can sway teamfights. But that's for another video. Next up, we have the bunker / duelist. This consists of high sustainability, self-heal, or regeneration, slow damage, and effectively they can 1vx. This just means that they're going to pull multiple people to their location where possible. Examples include a Spellbreaker Warrior, Conversion Hollowsmith Engineer, a Mender Bunker Weaver, a Bunker Druid, or a Chronomancer Bunker Mesmer. They are looking to get a numbers disadvantage, but to increase the chances of their team getting a numbers advantage across the map. They make that sacrifice. This warrior has pushed far straight out of the base and has gone straight to the enemy close point to create a neutral point. This just prevents the enemy team from getting any points, and it's a very long drawn out battle. In order to play as a duelist, you need to be very confident in your output. You need to know how to outplay your opponent as well as a potential +1. If you're not confident, I'm not sure this role is for you. As a bunker, you don't frequently want to be surrounded by people. You want to isolate yourself and make sure that people are drawn to you from the enemy team. If you see an enemy point available where you can 1v1, you should go to it and make the enemy come to you. That is your rotation. Next up, we have the team fighter. I know, it's a terrible name. Stop laughing, okay? This title represents the type of player that can't really sustain themselves when they're alone. However, surround them with a team and they're almost unstoppable. They benefit from their teammates using CC chain and healing them, supporting them. It's very hard to lock down a Necro when they have so much support around them, but it's very deadly to ignore them, as you've witnessed. Don't be fooled by the Scourge's health bar. You're about to see an example of their vulnerability. This is the same Scourge with the same build. However, this time he's going to be 1v1ing a Fresh Air Ellie. Fresh Air Elementalists can quickly dispatch a target if they land their full combo. However, if they get hit by anything from this Necro and locked down, that's it for the Fresh Air Ellie. It's gone. That said, look what it does to this Necro. All it takes is 2 combos, and that Necro, he's scared. He hasn't really done anything to punish the Fresh Air Ellie just yet, but by now it's too late. He's dead. This is why this is a team fighter and not a bruiser. And now we're going to see why this build does not work 1v2. This cannot be a bunker, and it cannot be a duelist. The Necro is going to die incredibly quickly, and all he really wants is some support. He wishes his Firebrand was with him, but quite honestly, it's probably his fault for not seeking out his Firebrand in the first place. I think I've proven my point here. Next up, the damage carry / +1. These consist of the likes of the Fresh Air Ellie you just witnessed. In this instance, we see a Core Guardian. They have very high damage, but they're easily punished. Their damage is very spiky. They can turn a fight and leave very, very quickly. And as you can see here, they are completely punishing the Druid. The Druid has to burn all of their cooldowns in this bunker v bunker matchup, and the Guardian's only been here for 3 seconds. The Core Guardian would not do very well in a sustained duel. It prefers the environment of a +1 and quick disengage, or maybe even picking people off on the roam between points. Now let's see this from a Power Shatter Mesmer perspective. A Power Shatter Mesmer can be very vulnerable when built completely glass cannon. In this case, Misha is that. He came in with the intention of one-shotting the Spellbreaker. He procced the passive Endure Pain on the Spellbreaker almost immediately, and killed him a couple of seconds later. He then immediately disengages. Next up, the Bruiser. The Bruiser is effectively the jack of all trades. It's not as sustainable as a bunker, and it doesn't have as much damage as the damage carry. It kinda sits in the middle as a hybrid. In this instance, we see a Power Shiro Revenant approaching a Mesmer. The Revenant uses their kit to eat a lot of the damage using Facet of Light, and ultimately wins the 1v1. Their kit allows for minor sustained dueling, but as I said, nowhere near the capability of holding a 1v2. They want to win the 1v1, and then get the point and then leave. Chances are they burned a lot of kit in trying to win the 1v1, which means if somebody else comes to approach them to +1, they will most likely die. Sometimes it's just worth staying with your team. As a hybrid, you're completely capable of doing this. Your damage output is worthy of team fights. It's not just 1v1s. But you shouldn't really expect to kill somebody in a couple of seconds. Your output is very consistent, and when you take some damage, you're not just going to bend over and take it. You can resustain yourself using your cooldowns, and maybe even turn it back on the opponent that's engaged on you. Honestly, this is my favourite role. Finally, we have the support. The support's priority is to keep others alive. Due to their sustainability, sometimes they can hold a point 1v2 or 1v3. However, in my opinion, they're better spent when healing their teammates. They can completely change the tide of a game just by keeping their teammates alive. As you can see in this instance, the Firebrand is doing a good job at keeping the health bars almost full. Meanwhile, his teammates are actually doing a good job at pressuring the enemy team. The enemy team does not have a support, and thus they will lose this fight based on sustainability alone. Any damage that the blue team does, the Firebrand heals it. But any damage that the red team does just stays on their health bars. And this is why the support is a great addition. Now what you're about to witness is absolutely disgusting. I've taken it upon myself to put this into the video. You're going to see why I did this in a second. That's absolutely f***ing ridiculous, isn't it? That Signet res right there, that can make or break a game. So ladies and gentlemen, I show you the support. More specifically, the Firebrand support. And this was my final role. Now after naming these roles, I wanted to think about composition. I think I've come up with a pretty good idea of how a group should be formed, and what it should be made up of. Now of course, in the likes of solo queue, this is just not possible. You guys can try and communicate and try and build something, but 9 times out of 10 you're not going to get what you want. So this composition recommendation, I think it's sort of relative to only the daily AT and the monthly AT. And of course hot join arenas. So here's what I think actually adds up to be the current meta AT comp. This consists of 1 or 2 Roamer +1 classes, 1 team fighter, 1 support class, 1 or 2 bruiser classes, and 1 bunker/duelist. If you were to take one of each type, I wholly believe that you would have a very strong composition. And I think that if you look carefully, you will see that these compositions are already the types of teams that are winning the monthly ATs. To clarify, I think that this is only worthy in the current meta. I have no idea how the future will play out for PvP in Guild Wars 2. Who knows? This might end up being worthless. But hopefully it's worth something now to you. Oh, and I should note, you can win with almost any composition. You don't need to run this composition that I've suggested. Having skilled players that are more skilled than your enemy team, that should win you the game. I just believe that this composition has the correct balance of damage, sustain, and mobility, and thus is preferential. This video was definitely much harder to make than the first one that I made. This one went into so much more specific detail that I actually had to think about everything that I was saying quite hard. Ultimately, what I wanted from this was for people to be able to look at their traits, their amulet, their rune, and discover the synergies. I feel like that's the first step in determining what role you are, and then with that role, you determine how you play. Please let me know what you thought of this video. I hope that some of you have actually sat through the whole thing, and for those that didn't, I'd be intrigued to know why, but I guess if you didn't, then you're not going to be hearing this at the end. There wasn't really a methodology for me to cut out the majority of this video. Everything that I involved I think was completely relevant, especially going through my own traits and revealing the synergies. That in itself will help you to distinguish what a synergy is, and I definitely think that helped make my point. I hope that this helps you all, because that's all that I'm looking to achieve here. If you like what you've seen here today, consider subscribing or following me on Twitch. And a special thanks to everybody that helped me to make the PvP examples. These people took about an hour out of their day to just help me get some footage. Once again, I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you.